Oakwood Heights had always been the kind of neighborhood people dreamed of living in: pristine sidewalks, towering oak trees, and houses that seemed to belong in a high-end lifestyle magazine. But beneath its polished exterior lurked something uglier, something unspoken yet deeply ingrained. Lucy Lockwood had lived there for over 2 decades, watching the neighborhood change around her. She considered herself a gatekeeper of sorts, ensuring that Oakwood Heights remained the right kind of place for the right kind of people. So when Luca Kemper moved in, she felt an immediate sense of resentment. Luca was young. He was black. And he was successful. Too successful, in Lucy's eyes. His house was one of the largest on the block, a modern architectural masterpiece with sleek glass windows and a driveway that wrapped around a front yard so well manicured it looked like it belonged on a golf course. But it wasn't the house that bothered Lucy the most, it was what sat in that driveway. She stared from her window, gripping her cup of tea tightly. "There's no way he made his money legally," she muttered under her breath. Luca ran a real estate company, that much she knew. But she refused to believe that flipping houses or selling properties could earn someone that kind of wealth, especially someone like him. In her mind, there had to be something more, something illegal. And so, she watched. For months, Lucy became obsessed with Luca. She noted the cars that came and went, scrutinized every guest he had over, even counted the number of packages delivered to his doorstep. Every movement fueled her suspicions. He had to be a drug dealer. A scam artist. Something wasn't right, and she was going to prove it. She spoke to other neighbors, planting seeds of doubt. "Haven't you ever wondered where he gets his money?" she whispered to Mrs. Calloway across the street. "Well, I heard he owns some real estate business," Mrs. Calloway replied, frowning. "Seems successful enough." Lucy scoffed. "Real estate? Please. That's just a cover. You don't make that kind of money from selling houses, not legally, anyway." Though some neighbors brushed her off, a few started to listen, nodding in agreement. The paranoia consumed her. Every time Luca pulled into his driveway in another sports car, every time he entertained guests late into the evening, every time he simply existed in a way she didn't approve of, it drove her further into her delusions. Something had to be done. Lucy didn't hesitate. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911, her fingers trembling with a mix of excitement and self-righteous fury. "911, what's your emergency?" the dispatcher's voice came through the line. "I need to report suspicious activity in my neighborhood," Lucy said urgently, lowering her voice as if she were exposing some grand criminal operation. "What kind of suspicious activity, ma'am?" "My neighbor, Luca Kemper, he has a collection of extremely expensive luxury cars, but I don't believe he has a real job. I think he's dealing drugs." There was a pause on the other end. "Has he made any threats or engaged in any criminal behavior?" Lucy's irritation flared. "No, but I know what's going on. I've seen this before. These guys pretend to be businessmen, but they're really running illegal operations." Another pause. "Ma'am, do you have any direct evidence of a crime?" "I don't need evidence," she snapped. "I need officers down here before our neighborhood turns into a crime-infested." "All right, we'll send someone to check it out." Lucy hung up, her heart pounding with anticipation. Finally, someone would look into Luca. Finally, she'd be proven right. Minutes later, the sound of sirens filled the air. 4 police cruisers pulled up to Luca's home, their red and blue lights flashing across the quiet street. Luca had just stepped out of his car, holding a coffee in one hand and his phone in the other, when he saw them approaching. He sighed, already knowing exactly what was happening. He had seen this too many times before. The officers stepped forward, their hands hovering near their holsters. "Sir," one of them called out, "we received a report of suspicious activity at this residence." Luca raised an eyebrow, setting his coffee on the roof of his car. "Oh. Suspicious how?" The officer hesitated. A neighbor called in a concern about, he cleared his throat. Your vehicles and source of income. Luca exhaled sharply through his nose and smirked. Let me guess. Lucy. The officers exchanged glances. They had heard of Lucy before. She had called in complaints about delivery drivers, landscapers, and even a biracial couple who had moved in a few streets over. It was always the same type of concern. Luca crossed his arms. So, let me get this straight, you came all the way out here, with 4 squad cars, because my neighbor thinks I'm too rich to be black. The officers shifted uncomfortably. Sir, we just have to check. Luca didn't let him finish. Would you like to see my business license? My tax records? The titles for my cars? His voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. Or maybe you'd like to search my house, frisk me, and pretend like this is justified. Silence. After an awkward exchange, the officers realized they had nothing on him. They offered a half-hearted apology and left, leaving Luca standing in his driveway, shaking his head. Lucy, still watching from her window, expected to see Luca arrested, humiliated. Instead, she saw him pull out his phone, a slow smirk creeping across his face. Luca wasn't just going to let this go. If Lucy wanted to play detective, she was about to find out what it felt like to be exposed. Luca sat in his home office, still irritated by the ordeal. He had spent years building his success, carefully navigating the world of business, yet people like Lucy Lockwood still believed they had the right to police his existence. It wasn't the first time he had dealt with racial profiling, but this time, he wasn't going to let it slide. He had a strong network, lawyers, journalists, tech professionals, people who knew how to find things. And if Lucy wanted to dig into his life, Luca figured it was only fair to return the favor. It didn't take long. A simple background check, some deep internet searches, and a few calls to people who specialized in uncovering secrets led to something shocking. Luca had expected to find some racist comments, maybe a history of discrimination complaints, but this was much worse. Old black and white photos surfaced, tucked away in the corners of the internet, buried but not forgotten. They were grainy but clear enough, Lucy, decades younger, standing proudly in a crowd of white-robed figures. The pointed hoods, the burning cross, the unmistakable symbol of hate. Luca stared at the screen. She wasn't just a bigot, she was once a full-fledged member of the Ku Klux Klan. Further investigation revealed that she had been an active participant in a now disbanded chapter of the Klan, one that had a history of voter intimidation, harassment, and violent threats against black and immigrant communities. She had managed to live a quiet life in Oakwood Heights, hiding in plain sight, but the internet never truly forgets. Luca didn't hesitate. He posted the photos and evidence online, along with a short, scathing caption. When your racist neighbor calls the cops on you for being successful, but you find out she has skeletons of her own. The reaction was immediate. Within minutes, the post went viral. Comments poured in, shock, outrage, disgust. People began sharing the images, demanding answers. News outlets picked up the story, and within hours, Lucy Lockwood was trending nationwide. For years, Lucy had judged Luca, had whispered about him to neighbors, had tried to tear him down with false accusations. Now, she was the one being judged, and the world was not on her side. Lucy had no idea what was happening at first. She had woken up to an unusual number of notifications on her phone, missed calls, text messages, voicemails from numbers she didn't recognize. Confused, she shuffled out of bed and checked her email. Her stomach dropped. Hundreds of emails flooded her inbox, each one angrier than the last. Some were from strangers, others from people she hadn't spoken to in years. The subject lines alone sent a chill down her spine. Racist. Exposed. How do you sleep at night? She clicked on one, her hands shaking. I saw the photos. You disgust me. You don't deserve to live in this community, let alone anywhere near decent people. I hope you lose everything. Lucy's breath came in short gasps. What photos? What were they talking about? Then she saw it. The viral post. Luca's caption. The evidence. Her face in those haunting images. No, she whispered. No, no, no. She scrolled through the comments, each one worse than the last. People were digging into her past, uncovering a pattern of racism spanning decades. Old neighbors shared stories. A black family she had harassed years ago spoke up. A former co-worker revealed that Lucy had once refused to attend a company event because it was hosted by a black-owned catering business. And then came the news articles. Former KKK member exposed after racially profiling neighbor. Oakwood Heights woman calls police on black businessman, gets her own past uncovered. Social media uncovers disturbing history of racism in suburban community. Lucy's phone rang again. She hesitated before answering. It was her boss. Lucy, his voice was clipped, tight with restrained anger. We need to talk. I can explain, she blurted out. There's nothing to explain. His voice was cold. We've seen the reports. The photos. We've already released a statement. Her blood ran cold. A statement? We do not tolerate racism, her boss recited, as if reading from a script. Effective immediately, Lucy Lockwood is no longer employed with us. The line went dead. Lucy sank onto her couch, the weight of her reality crashing down. She had spent years crafting an image of respectability, of superiority. But now, all anyone saw was a racist. Her social media accounts were swarmed. People she thought were her friends were publicly distancing themselves, condemning her in comments. Her neighbors, the same ones who used to nod in agreement when she whispered her prejudices, were no longer defending her. She was alone. For years, Lucy had controlled the narrative, painting herself as the model citizen and others as the problem. But now, her true colors had been laid bare for the world to see. And the world was not forgiving. And Luca? He didn't even have to say another word. The truth had spoken for itself. Lucy Lockwood had never known true isolation until now. For weeks, she barely left her house. The once pristine home, which she had taken such pride in, now felt like a prison. The shades remained drawn, the curtains pulled tight, as she sat in the dim silence of her living room, phone in hand, scrolling through the wreckage of her life. Every attempt to defend herself had failed. The internet had branded her a racist, her name forever linked to the ugly truth of her past. Reporters had camped outside her home for days, eager for a statement she would never give. Her phone barely stopped ringing, calls from journalists, old acquaintances, even distant relatives either condemning her or cutting ties altogether. But the worst part? The thing she could not stand to face. The neighborhood had moved on, without her. One evening, she risked peeking through the blinds. What she saw made her stomach churn. Luca stood by his car, a sleek new Aston Martin, chatting and laughing with a group of neighbors. These were the same people who used to politely nod at Lucy in passing, the same ones who once whispered their quiet agreement when she voiced her disapproval of certain kinds of people moving in. But now, they were gathered around Luca like old friends, offering him handshakes, pats on the back, and words of support. Lucy's eyes darted to the street. One by one, luxury cars arrived at Luca's home, pulling into the driveway or lining up along the curb. Not just flashy sports cars, but professional vehicles too, elegant sedans, polished SUVs, cars that belonged to business leaders, CEOs, entrepreneurs. These were Luca's colleagues, his friends, his community. Supporters. She watched as they hugged him, clapped him on the shoulder, exchanged stories and laughter. A few people even carried gifts, bottles of wine, homemade desserts, gestures of goodwill and solidarity. And Lucy? She had no one. The realization clawed at her chest. She had spent years trying to control who was welcome in this neighborhood, yet now, she was the one who no longer belonged. She turned away from the window, sinking back into the shadows of her empty home. She had lost everything, not because of Luca, not because of the internet, but because of her own prejudice. And there was no undoing it now. Months passed, but the damage never faded. Lucy had once imagined living in Oakwood Heights for the rest of her life, growing old in the home she had so carefully maintained. But now, she couldn't even step outside without feeling the weight of 100 eyes on her. Nobody spoke to her. Nobody acknowledged her. She was a ghost in the place she had once ruled. Eventually, she made the decision she had dreaded the most: she had to leave. She put her house up for sale, hoping to make a quiet exit from the community that no longer wanted her. But word had spread, and no one wanted to buy from her. Potential buyers backed out upon learning who she was. Others lowballed her, unwilling to pay full price for a house tainted by scandal. In the end, she had no choice but to sell at a loss. Packing up her belongings, she looked around the empty house one last time. This was supposed to be her sanctuary, her legacy. Now, it was just another property she no longer had control over. With one final glance in Luca's direction, she drove away, leaving Oakwood Heights behind. But Luca? He thrived. His business, already successful, skyrocketed. The incident had shed light on racial profiling and discrimination, bringing attention to his work in ways he had never anticipated. Companies and investors, eager to support a man who had risen above hate, poured opportunities into his lap. He used his newfound platform to speak out, engaging in discussions about race, privilege, and justice. His story became a rallying point, a testament to resilience and dignity in the face of discrimination. As for Lucy, her name became a cautionary tale. People spoke of her in whispers, a living reminder that prejudice had consequences. She had a choice: to change, to learn, to confront the ugly truths about herself. But whether she did or not, the world moved on without her. Because hate always comes with a price.